Good evening. It's 7:01, Monday, November 14th, 2022. This is Athens City Council. We are meeting in a committee night, which is slightly different than our working sessions where we pass ordinances. Here we discuss upcoming legislation and determine if modifications are needed and so on. So the first thing we'll have to do is establish a quorum, and I see we have all members save one. President of Council Chris Nicely is acting mayor, and as President Pro Tem, I assume her duties as President of Council. Since we have a quorum, I understand we have to make a modification to our agenda under the Planning and Development, I believe.
Committee of the Whole.
Committee of the Whole. For a grant application. So I'll make a motion to amend the agenda.
Second.
Okay,
Call for a vote. All those in favor of amending the agenda, signify by saying aye. Aye. The agenda has been changed. Please remind me that we've changed it. I'm sorry, but at my age, I have a memory like a sieve. So, yeah, Committee of the Whole. Anyway, moving right along, the Transportation Committee will meet now and hear from the Ad Hoc Committee on Pedestrian Accessibility update. The way this will work is that all members of that Transportation Committee, myself, Sarah Grace, Alan Swank, and Ben Ziff will stay at the dais. The other members will retire to the desk on my left. All settled in? Great. We will hear from spokespeople concerning the Ad Hoc Committee on Pedestrian Accessibility. So if you will give us your name and the group that you represent, I'll let you start.
Great. I'm Diane Bouvier, and I chair the Ad Hoc Pedestrian Accessibility Committee. Oh, good. I was looking there and didn't see the slides. So thank you to the Transportation Committee for having us come here tonight, and to all of the council members. This is the Pedestrian Accessibility Committee's third update with the City Council, and our focus tonight will be to give voice to the community input that we received mostly this summer. So I think you'll be interested. I know we sent you a report to give you an idea of what we were going to be talking about, but I think you'll be interested to hear what the results have been. But to set the stage, I thought I wanted us to remember that sidewalks are really more than concrete. They're more than meeting ADA standards. They're more than ODOT regulations. We need to remember that there's really a magic to sidewalks. And we need to think about what happens on sidewalks. Even though they're throughout the city, how invisible they can be, especially when they take you seamlessly and safely to where you want to go. That's the magic we want everyone to feel when they use our sidewalks. So I had a thought, actually in the spring, to invite Wendy McVicker, Athens Poet Laureate and longtime Athens resident, to write a poem for us about sidewalks, which she graciously did, and she's here tonight to read her poem entitled Sidewalks.
Thank you, Diane. This is because I love sidewalks, and I am an inveterate walker on sidewalks. So my name is Wendy McVicker. I guess I'm supposed to say that. Athens Poet Laureate. This is Sidewalks. Sidewalks bring us together. Sidewalks help us get away. There we gather smiles, posies of wild and unexpected joys. Sometimes we do a little dance around the woman with a curious dog, two people kissing, someone who's wondering which shop to enter. We can amble or skip or roll or just stroll down a sidewalk. Cars, stay away. Once I found a list of words on a sidewalk, a ladder I climbed into a poem. A singer plucked a card from the sidewalk and discovered his stage name. Pop-up art appears, hopscotch, tiny handprints, chalked rainbows, a haiku. A cat may follow you home, a new friend. A wise person I know says, where the sidewalk ends, there ends civilization. That place where our lives meet and mingle, braid like currents in a river, flow together and apart, a sidewalk river that brings us news from far away, irrigates our world. Thank you.
That place where our lives meet and mingle. Thank you, Wendy, our cherished Athens Poet Laureate, for writing this poem and for adding poetry to our lives. Now I'd like to give an overview of what our process was for gathering community input. First we designed and implemented, sorry, I'm going to start all over. First we developed a space framework to give everyone sort of a language for talking about sidewalks, because we wanted people to say more than they're broken or they're fine. We wanted really to understand what were the issues that people were coming across. Then we developed a Qualtrics survey, and we did we passed it around to people we knew and also the Disability Commission members to make sure that we were clear in what we were trying to ask for and before we put it together. So we piloted it, we made changes, and then we launched the survey. And I have to say that when we decided to do a survey, I thought, okay, if we get 100 responses, I will be super happy. And within the first week, we had 100 responses. I was really blown away. We had 784 people respond to this survey. I've never seen that happen in any survey that I've been a part of. So I think in the end, so then we took time, we analyzed the results, we reviewed what people said. I think we reached saturation because we heard the same kinds of things a lot. And that we really wanted to, we sort of got the sense that the community is really committed to making sure we have sidewalks that work. There's a lot of expectation. There's a lot of sense that we need to do something with this, that we can't just let it sit. So I appreciate the fact that you as a committee were interested in us putting this together and getting community feedback. I think it really means that the city needs to be ready to take leadership to make things change. So first we're going to have, Stephanie's going to talk about the space model, because it really is a really interesting and a clear way to try to think about how we work with sidewalks. And then Solveig's going to talk about the data that we found, and then give a summary of what our next steps are. So thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Hunter. So I'm going to explain our catchphrase we came up with, which is pedestrians need more space. Space being safety, proximity, accessibility, connection, and ease. And as Diane said, we came up with this because we found that we were having trouble describing what we have, what we want, and what we don't want. And so this allows us to really explain, and it allows the people in the survey to reach past simple, it's okay. So first is safety. Safety refers to how secure a pedestrian feels while navigating the city's sidewalks and crosswalks. And I think we all really know what safety is. So safety can include things like the risk of crossing the road, tripping and falling, the road speed design, driver behavior, and of course, sheer pedestrian vulnerability, and how we have designed the road to emphasize that or ignore that when on the sidewalk, of course. Next comes proximity. So proximity allows pedestrians to reach their destination in about 15 minutes or 3/4 of a mile. And this comes from the concept of the 15-minute city. Right now, Athens is a 15-minute city by car. So you can just get just about anywhere in 15 minutes. But by walking, how far can you go? So this considers, can you reach necessities like socialization, recreation, public transportation? Can you get to the grocery store in a 15-minute walk? And so what we consider is various places around Athens have huge amounts of walkability, and plenty of places don't. So after proximity comes accessibility. So accessibility allows persons of all abilities to use continuous, level, and sufficiently wide sidewalks with turning radiuses and crosswalks and compliant curb ramps. This is if you have wheels, if you have a walker, if you have any mobility device or health condition, can you use our sidewalks? Are they ADA compliant? And so we're talking about the surface must be smooth. It must be level so that you're not tipping over. It must be wide enough. Can you pass another person without going onto the grass? Are the curb ramps there? Are the curb ramps usable? Do I push my stroller into them and flip it? That's a possibility. Are the slopes too steep? Are there just barriers in the sidewalk? Are there movable barriers like trash cans and cars, or are there things we can't move like utility poles or falling down retaining walls? Are there accommodations for people who have vision disabilities? Are there things like audible signals? If you are deaf, are you able to use our sidewalks? So next comes connection. Connection is about how sidewalks bring the community together physically through shared pedestrian paths and access to transit, and socially as friends and neighbors. So when you use our sidewalks, can you talk to your neighbors? Can you actually are they connected in a line? Can you use the sidewalks the whole way to your destination? And are you walking past parking lots? Or are you walking past human-scaled streetscapes? And is there a clear public-private definition? If you're walking through someone's yard to get there, that's not clear. And nobody on either side really likes that. And last comes ease. And it is not last but least. So ease considers how effortless and pleasant it is to walk, stroll, or roll. You should not have to be a hero to walk somewhere. Walking should be rewarding. And so this considers climate mitigation, like are there shade trees? Is the snow off the sidewalk? It includes lane sorting for busy streets, so streets like Court Street that have a lot of pedestrians. Is there a clear door lane, walking lane, furniture lane? Where do bikes go? Are there places to rest along the way? Can you sit on a bench? Is there a sign that says that these stairs are public? And is walking a pleasure, or are you huddling on the far edge of it hoping a car doesn't come off and wrap around you? And so this is our our entire model, and this is what we ask people about. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. So as to wrap up, pedestrians need more space, safety, proximity, accessibility, connection, and ease. I'm really happy with this model, so thank you very much for coming up. That was primarily theirs. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the data. I know we don't have very much time, and I did give you the reports, but I thought I'd hit the highlights. There were surveys and focus groups. As Diane essentially said, we really made an effort to try to have a methodology that was going to be as scientific as possible to get a full range of information from a wide variety of neighborhoods, as well as a demographic spread. So 784 participants for the survey alone. That, in a community of this size, in the summertime, was quite a feat. And we put a lot of effort into spreading that through social media, as well as through newspapers, the university, getting out at the donkey, etc. So just quickly about the demographics. The largest age group was between 35 and 44, smallest was 75 and over, and the other cohorts were about 15% of the rest of them. Primarily, the demographics fit fairly well with the overall demographics of the city. So we felt that we met that was a fairly representative sample. Okay, just real quickly, the relative space grades. As you can imagine, and I don't think anybody was surprised by this, if you look at a 4-point scale, you can see that accessibility got only a 1.83. Not good. But none of them reached over 2.38, and that was proximity. So we have a ways to go. All right, quickly, survey participants percentage by neighborhood. Not surprisingly, the Near East Side and the West Side had the biggest pool of survey participants. And probably because they have the most number of old sidewalks, and for that matter, the most number of sidewalks, period, actually. And also, as you can see, University Estates had the lowest. We don't really have sidewalks over there. There's one little sidewalk, that's it. But the rest of it, they don't. And the Far East Side and University Estates, for the most part, really don't want sidewalks. So that emphasized the point that as we go through and try to determine priorities, et cetera, we want to individualize it by neighborhood so that we're not going to force people to have sidewalks that don't want them, as a small example. Okay, again, 2 targeted focus groups, and Diane did a wonderful job with this. She worked with the Disability Commission to talk to people who have disabilities. She also worked with the community center and interviewed people as a focus group for persons over age 60, because those are the ones that obviously would have the most difficulty navigating our sidewalks. So we want to make sure that if they're happy and we're following the ADA compliance, that everyone else is going to be satisfied as well. So they're an important target group, and the impetus behind why we did this in the first place. Okay, so some comments from seniors. I'm going to let you look over this on your own. But essentially, not surprisingly, they felt that, you know, it was difficult to get around. People fall down and trip on the bricks, etc. It's not smooth and comfortable. And also, people had questions about, you know, what if I need to have a sidewalk ground down? How do I do that? What do we do to help our sidewalks look better, get better, repaired, etc.? Okay, voices of people with disabilities. This was really heartfelt, I think, hearing about how people had to figure out a strategy to get from where they lived or where they were to the next place they wanted to get to, and knowing that, well, I can't go this sidewalk because it stops, and then I have to go out into the street, and then I have to go this way, and then I have to, oh, this one has a pothole, I can't go there, it has a pole in the middle of the side, I can't go there. So they had to plan it out and figure out how they were going to get to where they wanted to go. Well, this is just not okay. And also the curb cuts, I mean, you know, on downtown, we have some really shaky bricks and no curb cuts in areas right downtown. We need to do something about that. So it needs to be smoother, flatter, wider, and continuous. Okay, so some key findings. We have tilted, heaved, cracked sidewalks. 77% of the respondents named smooth, level sidewalks as the highest accessibility priority. Dangerous sidewalks, no curb ramps, as I said. We have lack of sufficient crosswalks. We don't have enough crosswalks in areas like Richland Avenue, West Union. Trying to get from one place to another without crosswalks makes it very difficult and not accessible. So lack of or discontinuous pathways, how do we decide where that goes? And there's also the issue of traffic calming, which came up several times as well. But then there's the issue of ice and snow and things getting in the way, greenery, etc. And then how much are we going to emphasize pedestrian use over car use? And that was a theme by some people, is that we've overemphasized car use, and if we're really going to think about a green community, which we're trying to do, as in I'm so excited about our electric transit bus, let's continue that by really thinking about how we can make this more pedestrian friendly. Then finally, and now we're at the end here, we have to draft the final plan. We have to get some additional feedback to make sure that some of our proposals and ideas are going to be accepted, or get some feedback on them. We're going to present that to council. We're going to then finalize the report. Probably the last little bits, we're going to try to get as much done for December And then I think we're going to not actually have the report formatted, et cetera, until January. That's pretty much how we're seeing it. Any questions?
Members of the committee? Comments, suggestions? Member Swank?
This is good. I think this is a good framework and a good foundation, which to move on to the next steps. Obviously, a lot of work went into this. I don't know if it's a 10,000-pound elephant or a gorilla or what we say in the room, but one of the things that many people are going to ask is how much? How much for the city and how much for me? Where in the process, where will that cost begin to be addressed?
Can I? Do you have it? I think that we're not going to describe that in detail now. We don't have time, and there's too many different options. However, we're trying to be very creative, looking at models around the country of what works and what doesn't work. We obviously are looking at what the law says, and we know what that is. But we want to be a model for other cities, so we don't want to be restricted to a very narrow scope that isn't working, hasn't worked, doesn't work anywhere. So we want to look at what can we do that's still legal, et cetera, that will actually make a difference. But we're not ready to present that publicly yet. We still have to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's and asking all the right questions. But you'll be impressed.
Okay, so that's down the road.
That is down the
Okay.
road. Yeah, this is just one piece of it. This is
Right.
what do the people want? What does the law say? What are we doing now? What have we been doing? What's a framework we can live with? And then what's reasonable? Is that okay? All right. So that's where we are with that.
Okay, and the second point has to do with your bullet point number 2 here on the screen. Continue to get feedback and input on the plan. I know you'd like to get this done in a timely fashion. There is one neighborhood association in the city that meets monthly, and that's the Far East Side Neighborhood Association, where you would have a captive audience. And I would suggest, since that is half of the ward that I represent, that perhaps contact the leadership of that group to see if they would be willing to advertise to their members to sit down in a captive audience. We can do it down at the City Rec building, and you can get some additional input, which it says you're going to ask for in the second bullet point.
Okay, that's certainly a consideration. As far as I know, the other neighborhood associations haven't been meeting. I've been checking with the West Side. They haven't been meeting. So we'll see about that.
Yeah, FINA just met last Thursday night, so
Okay.
do it on a regular basis, once a month.
Good to know. But we do need to make sure that city staff, you'll be happy about this, for us to ask you questions before we present something to the city. And we'll see about that. But
Okay.
yeah, it's coming along. There's a lot of other pieces to it, but this was important to let you know what the city wanted.
Member Crowe?
My question was answered. Thank you, Member Rundle.
Member Ziff?
Just a quick comment, and it's just, I don't really have a question. You were very thorough with all this information. Thanks for getting it to us ahead of time, being able to look over it beforehand. So I'm not great at absorbing information just immediately. It's nice to have some time to think about it. But there's a lot of stuff that I really love about being on city council, but I think what I probably love the most is seeing stuff like this and just a group of concerned citizens volunteering their time to try and better the community that they're a part of. And it makes me want to cry. I mean, honestly, it moves me almost to tears.
Control yourself.
I will not. If you ever watch a movie with me, I'm a crier. But I appreciate so much all the work that you guys have put into this. And there's another organization here tonight as well with ABA who's also, thank you, but we'll get to you later. But thank you guys for being here. Thank you for doing this work. Thanks for helping the city with this.
Well, we want to thank the people in the community, the many people, aside from the ones who answered the survey, who have participated in trying to help us out, and also the many city employees who have answered questions and provided us with a lot of input that was very useful. So,
Ben, I'll make you cry. Most people don't know this, but they also did this without a budget. Not only was it volunteer time, but without a budget.
I'll be back in 5 minutes.
I'm a big believer in volunteerism, by the way,
Yeah.
so. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there's no more questions. Any other comments from the audience on this? Okay.
I'd like to tell them thank you very much for your hard work.
Okay, you can do that. Okay, that was the only item on the Transportation Committee. We'll now hear the Planning and Development Committee. That includes members Grace Crowell McCary, who is absent, and Solveig Spilnes. Others can retire. Well, I could say get out. Trying to be polite.
Try.
Trying. Oh, you don't need that. I let the chair, Planning and Development, take over from here.
Thank you, Member Reisner. And this evening, Planning and Development has just one item on our agenda, and that is the discussion of a requested lot split on at 3640 and 3648 Pleasant Hill Road. And when someone who owns property that is outside of Athens city limit but is within a 3-mile radius of the city wishes to split a lot or do other similar activities, they do have to come to the city for approval of that process. So the best descriptor of what has happened and needs to happen comes from a memorandum from the Athens City Planning Commission, who voted on this particular case and made the recommendation to City Council. So it's slightly more complicated than a lot split in that it actually needs to be handled as a major subdivision but be treated as a minor subdivision. So the reason for that is because it is approximately 10 acres total, and the split is a front-back split. So there would be approximately 3 acres in the front lot, and then approximately 7 acres in the back lot. But the back one does not have road frontage. The plan calls for an easement for an existing driveway for access to the back lot. And we were provided with pretty detailed information, and it was reviewed by Office of Code Enforcement and also the Planning Commission, and the motion was 3-0 to forward this on to City Council for review. This process also involved an inspection by the Athens City County Health Department to review the septic needs and requirements of the lots. And the Health Department has signed off on the request. So that brings it to us. And I believe that the requester of this split, Aaron Carter, is present this evening. Is that correct? Yes. Hi. And thank you for coming. So we'll start off with first, are there any questions from members of the committee? Okay. Questions from other members of council? Yes, Member Swank?
Probably for Mr. Stone. When we have requests like this, first question is, do we handle each one on its own? In other words, do we judge it on its own merits?
Yes. This is an odd one. You don't see most of the lot splits that occur in the 3-mile limit because those are administrative approvals. However, sometimes a provision of the lot split triggers the major subdivision regulations in accordance with our subdivision codes. And in those particular instances, even when they're extremely minor actions, technically, they're considered major subdivisions, which require city council approval. And so the requester gets caught in this kind of catch-22 where it's got to go through planning commission and then to city council for approval. And so, that's what has happened here. And it's because of the fact that there's an easement necessary to access this back property. I don't anticipate this area ever annexing, but that's the reason why state law says that anything within 3 miles of the corporation boundary is under from a lot split perspective, is under the purview of the city. But in those instances, we, have to follow our code, and that's why you're seeing it. But yes, we do look at them individually.
Because I have no concern with this one, but the fact that we're granting an easement to a property with no frontage, if this were to set precedent, could potentially adversely affect another situation within the city that may be coming forward. So I guess my question is, in that particular situation, could they refer back to this as precedent for granting that easement where there was no frontage?
I can't think of an instance in the city limits where we've done this. In instances external to the city limits where we allow access via an easement, our code says that up to 4 parcels can be served by a private easement. So without triggering the major subdivision, the reason why this particular case triggered it is because it's a new easement and it's an area without frontage. It's probably not the best practice in a more dense environment, but in a situation like this where, and they've used this driveway for, a long time, and they just want to split the back parcel, and as long as there's a proper understanding that, who owns access to that easement that runs with the land, we don't see a problem with this particular situation. I don't know that I'd want to do this inside the city limits in a more dense area.
Great, thank you.
Acting Mayor Nicely.
And I don't know if it was exactly the same situation, but several years ago, there was a lot on Carroll Road where there was a back part, and they requested the easement and approval of it, and it was not approved.
Yeah.
And just for clarifying, it is a private easement from,
Correct.
yeah, that is all, it's from one piece of the property to the other piece of the property. It doesn't involve the city, like, granting the easement.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's just being incorporated in this, what would be the new deeds for the lot split. Are there any other questions or comments? Ms. Carter, is there anything you would like to say to clarify anything? Okay. Yeah. And, if there are no other questions or comments, then that concludes committee for this evening.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wasn't your committee the grant application?
No,
No.
that's going under Committee of the Whole.
Committee of the whole.
Committee of the whole,
Thanks.
thanks.
We'll get to it. We'll just keep you here a long time.
Not as long as last week.
I'll get everybody settled back up here. We'll call the Committee of the Whole. That includes all members of City Council. Get them settled in here. The first item on the Committee of the Whole to cover is the safe reproductive health care. Member Grace is shepherding the proposed resolution through council, and I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you, Member Eisner. So this is a draft, what we have before us this evening is a draft resolution that I believe came to us through the Athenians for Bodily Autonomy and was modeled, at least in part, after the legislation adopted by Columbus City. And this has been reviewed by our city law director as well as by our chief of police, and is outlining in many different whereases the problem that is facing particularly people with uteruses, and but also their families and their significant others. And so I, after it was reviewed by our law director and was sent to me, I reviewed it, and I did make a few changes. Some, since I'm introducing it, to meet my personal preferences, and then some in order to, with the guidance of our law director and our clerk of council, to align it with our city rules and restrictions. So I'll read just a couple of the whereases, but then I will read the sections following that. And the one that I changed that maybe would be most noticeable is the first whereas. Whereas people have a basic human right to medical treatment, including abortion. And I believe the original language said pregnant people. And, oh, no, it was the second one. The city of Athens honors the rights of all people to bodily autonomy. And that one originally said pregnant people. And I wanted to highlight this is not an issue that only faces pregnant people. The restriction to abortion and reproductive health care primarily is something that women face or pregnant women face. But I want to acknowledge that we are honoring the rights of all people to bodily autonomy, because I think there are potentially other battles coming our way. And so I wanted to go ahead and put that out there, that all people should have the right to bodily autonomy, to make choices and have control over their private medical decisions. So there are a lot of whereases that pertain to court cases, but the final whereas is that the current legal status of access to safe and necessary reproductive health care in Ohio makes it important that the City of Athens adopt this resolution to encourage the mayor to deprioritize the enforcement of laws that criminalize access to safe reproductive health care procedures and services for the preservation of the public peace, property, health, and safety. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Athens, Ohio. Section 1. We, the members of Athens City Council, affirm a commitment to protect the right of city residents to make reproductive health decisions, including abortion care, for themselves. Section 2. Athens City Council encourages the mayor, except to the extent otherwise required by state or federal law, not to use City of Athens funds for any of the following. A, to store or catalog any report of an abortion, miscarriage, or other reproductive health care act. B, to provide information to any other governmental body or agency about an abortion, miscarriage, other reproductive health care act, unless such information is provided to defend the patient's right to abortion care or the health care provider's right to provide that care. And C, conduct surveillance or collect information related to an individual or organization for the purpose of determining whether an abortion has occurred, except for aggregated data without personally identifying information or personal health information, which is collected for purposes unrelated to criminal investigation, enforcement, or prosecution. Section 3 reads that Section 2 does not apply in cases where coercion or force is alleged to have been used against the pregnant person, or in cases involving an allegation of conduct criminally negligent to the health of the pregnant person seeking care, or where the abortion, miscarriage, or reproductive health care is not the crime being investigated, but evidence of another crime. Athens City Council encourages the mayor not to use City of Athens funds for the investigation or support for the prosecution of any allegation, charge, or information relating to the outcome of a given pregnancy, including abortion and abortion-related care, or any party thereto, be the lowest priority for enforcement and the use of city resources and personnel, except in the following cases. A, where coercion of force is used against the pregnant person, coercion or force. B, of criminally negligent conduct involving the health of the pregnant person seeking care. And C, where the abortion, miscarriage, or reproductive health care is not the crime being investigated, but evidence of another crime. And this resolution shall be in full force and effect at the earliest moment permitted by law upon its passage and approval by the mayor. So, for those who have read, reviewed previous versions of this, some of the changes were necessary because of what authority City Council has. And so the specific funding allocations within city administration, including the city police department, are not stipulated by City Council, but are rather set by the administration and by the police department. And so we, to set specific budgetary restrictions other than would require an ordinance and significant change. And so we are taking the route of a resolution to urge the administration to prioritize and deprioritize these types of investigations. And further, though I regret to say so, our city law director is not the person or office that prosecutes felony crimes, and that is the city office. They prosecute misdemeanors, and with changing laws in Ohio, abortion crimes will likely be treated as or coded as felonies. So we are limited in the scope of our authority, but a lot of the purpose of this resolution is to make a statement of our beliefs and while acknowledging the limitations of our authority. Does anyone have questions or comments? Yes, Member Spielness.
Yeah, we received an email this afternoon saying this is and I had read the other one, but I didn't have time to read the change, so I just want to be clear about what the change was that came today.
It was that the city council, rather than the language that it is the policy of the city of Athens that funds not be spent, that it is that we, the members of council, affirm the commitment, and we encourage the mayor to not use city funds for the investigation purposes. Yeah.
Yeah, just to follow up. So, yeah, because I had written this morning to you and to Law Director Eliason saying that it sounded like an ordinance asking for financial things, and that's not really a resolution.
Right.
So
And
I think that change is appropriate based on the limitations of what we can do and whatnot.
Correct,
Okay.
yeah. The law director and clerk of council and I were all on a call talking through possible options this afternoon.
Okay, good.
So, thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
Two quick questions. In section 2, and if you don't know the answer to this, we can obviously defer to the law director at a later time. What does this mean? Athens City Council encourages the mayor, I know what that means, except to the extent otherwise required by state or federal law. Well, what does that mean?
That means that there could be instances where state law requires that the city do some of these things. And we don't have the authority to say, well, that the city administration cannot follow state or federal law.
So if that is indeed the case, and I accept your explanation as that being the case, do we individually or collectively risk violating our oath of office to uphold the laws, the Constitution of the state of Ohio and the United States of America in making this recommendation?
No, I don't believe we do. Because we're saying that except in the cases where they're required to do so under state or federal law, that we're asking the mayor to not use city funds for these purposes, except where otherwise required.
So we're transferring that liability to him?
No, we're carving out the exception. Like, we're not saying, mayor, make a decision to do these things, even if it goes against state or federal law. It is except to the extent otherwise required. So do not store information regarding a report of an abortion except what is possibly required by state or federal law. Don't store anything extra. And so we're saying, we, City Council, are not asking the mayor to violate state or federal law. We are specifically saying, except for things that you have to do according to state and federal law, please don't do these things.
Okay, all right, that's
Yeah.
good. 'Cause that was a concern of mine.
Yeah, no, it was, that language is in there to do the opposite.
So if the law requires the mayor to do X, Y, and Z, we're affirming that the mayor should do X, Y, and Z. But if the
Yes.
law does not require the the mayor to do X, Y, and Z. After all these whereases, we are encouraging him not to spend city funds.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Administration? I think, I'm not chair of committee of the whole, so it goes back to you for comments from the audience, I think.
Well, if you're done with your, okay. Comments from the audience? Please give us your name and, you know the routine.
Yep, my name is Ari Faber. I'm the operations coordinator at United Campus Ministry Center, and I live on Meadow Lane. I wanted to start by saying thank you, thank you, thank you. When I read the resolution this morning, I couldn't stop tears coming to my eyes. Not only tears of relief at seeing hard work and persistence paying off, but also tears for all the individuals across the state and country who don't have local governments willing to fight for them and defend their rights to bodily autonomy. I appreciate the work of City Council and my co-organizers more than my words can adequately describe. That being said, I believe some of the wording in sections 3 and 4C should be changed. They make it sound like abortion is a crime, and while it likely will be after 6 weeks gestation in Ohio soon, we do not believe in the authority of any governance to make safe abortion criminal. As it is currently written, Section 3 states that the policy stated above does not apply in cases where coercion or force is alleged to have been used against the pregnant person, or in cases involving an allegation of conduct criminally negligent to the health of the pregnant person seeking care, or where the abortion, miscarriage, or reproductive health care is not the crime being investigated, but evidence of another crime. We would recommend editing it to say, the policy stated above does not apply in cases where coercion or force is alleged to have been used against the pregnant person, or in cases involving an allegation of conduct criminally negligent to the health of the pregnant person seeking care, or where the abortion, miscarriage, or reproductive health care is evidence of a crime. In Section 4C, a similar edit should be made. Instead of reading where the abortion, miscarriage, or reproductive health care is not the crime being investigated by evidence of another crime, it would be better if it read where the abortion, miscarriage, or reproductive health care is evidence of a crime. Again, thank you most sincerely for your time and energy spent on this resolution. It'll go far in protecting the citizens of Athens and students of Ohio University. I know I speak for many when I say how grateful I am to live in a city where elected officials care about our rights to bodily autonomy enough to do something about it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Lorraine McCosker, Elmwood Place. So I guess I have a couple of questions. I had something to speak to, but first of all, over the years, I've observed resolutions being put forth. So a resolution is indeed simply something, a statement, and there's really nothing to back up if we do indeed find ourselves in situations where people are being prosecuted for seeking abortions. So I personally really had thought that you would be passing an ordinance. My follow-up to that is, yes, we're in a situation where we have these very draconian laws that are being implemented in this state government are invalid in other state governments in the U.S. And I think it's important to us to actually question that authority by the governor, by the state legislature, and by the attorney general. So I would very much like to see something more substantial where we were absolutely not prosecuting people who were seeking this medical care. Abortion is medical care, it's a human right, it's a civil right. And we have 20,000 students that come into our community each year, most of them of reproductive age. We're dependent on that economy to keep this city functioning. Why would they come to Ohio when they could actually go to jail for seeking reproductive health care? So I think that this is really something that needs to be addressed strongly and forthright, and not just saying that, oh, great, we have this resolution and this is what we will believe, but we won't put any money into the prosecution, but there's really nothing to back up what our belief system is. If indeed the Attorney General decides to come after some of our community members. So I'd really like it if you would talk about that, the fact that why you didn't choose an ordinance and, you know, really what your position is as far as substantiating this civil right of the community members. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Oh, you're not going to address it?
No, we don't do that here.
When do you do it, Jeff?
This is a working committee. Okay,
Sarah,
I mean,
can you address it?
you're asking me questions, and
I can address a couple of
Okay, good.
things if
Thank you.
there are not facilities within the city of Athens that perform abortions. People have to leave the city to get an abortion even when they are legal within the state of Ohio. City council only has authority over what happens within the city of Athens. And so that's one issue that also when a crime is a felony, which I believe is what will happen within the state of Ohio, we as a city, we're a statutory city, we do not have the power or authority to dictate what the county prosecutor does, and it would be the county prosecutor who prosecutes felonies within Athens County. And we don't have any authority to dictate to that person, that elected individual, what their job is. And they are bound to their own set of rules as far as whether they uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Ohio. So I promise you, I wish that I could say which state laws apply within the city of Athens and which do not. But I cannot. We don't, the city does not have the authority to say, well, some state laws don't apply within here. It would be, we are within the state of Ohio. So what you're asking of us is not something that we have the authority to do and would not hold up in court. And this is just my own personal, I think that creating a target, saying, hey, people come to Athens to do something that the state has made illegal, would create a target for the people who provided those services and would subject them to further prosecution from the state level. But that's just my own personal suspicion. But the basics of it are we don't have the authority to say that the city does not have to abide by state law. That's the governmental structure that we live within.
And I guess I wonder how Columbus is then going forth with it. How is that different? Because they actually they provide services there.
Look into what they're saying they can actually do. And this is a really challenging issue for me. I'm just going to be personal here.
It is indeed a challenging issue in 2022. We should not be addressing this.
I agree. I never thought that I would be addressing this. I have my personal beliefs, and I agree with you 100%. Abortion is health care. Everyone should have the right to choose for themselves what their health care should look like and be. But I also, as was mentioned, have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, and I have limited power. There's not something that I can change in the city that's within the state.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would hope that the city addresses this because we are going to be seeing a more repressive law coming out of this next legislature. And we don't have the Supreme Court justices to hold it up. So this is a critical issue. And I think one that each of us should be pretty terrorized by. Even if you're not seeking health care yourself, there are aspects of this that will impact the entire state, and it's very draconian. Thank you.
Oh, Member Swank.
I'd like to just briefly go back to the comments of a previous speaker. I don't know, maybe as I said, been 45 minutes of listening to Nine Inch Nails last night. It's kind of fried my brain, but I don't really understand what this means. Section 2 does not apply in cases where coercion or force is alleged to have been used against a pregnant person. Member Grace, could you explain that to me? I'm having trouble with the verbiage.
Section 2 is where City Council urges the mayor to not store or catalog a
Right,
report of an
understand
abortion,
that part.
all of that.
But this-
So then, Section 2, we're saying, Section 2, all that asking you not to store this information, that doesn't apply if there was coercion or force that caused the pregnancy.
Okay,
So
okay.
we don't want to say mayor and police department don't hold on to information or evidence or reports in cases where a crime, for instance, a rape or abuse has occurred and evidence of an abortion or reproductive health care is part of the case there.
Okay, yeah, where I got confused is alleged to have been used against the pregnant person. That almost appears to be after the fact, where instead of used against, to have caused the pregnancy would be a little clearer. To that point, if you would be so kind as to, after the meeting, get that suggested verbiage to Member Grace so that that can be reviewed before this comes. There will be no vote tonight. This is a committee meeting. But if you could get that suggested verbiage, perhaps she can share that with the law director and we can craft the best resolution possible. Thank you, Ari.
Anything else?
I'm Sarah Clay, Ohio Community Rights. So we're talking about the differences between ordinance versus resolution and where your powers lie as our city council, where our mayor's powers lie and our law director's powers lie when it comes to state control versus local control, federal law versus state law, felonies versus misdemeanors. One of our two ordinances that were passed by the people, TACO, is an ordinance dealing with marijuana crimes. And in that case, we took the direction of misdemeanors only, and where we felt like our authority lies as a community. The other community ordinance on our books is the Watershed Protection Act, which says that there will be no fracking in the city limits. There will be no wastewater injection wells in the city limits. There will be no frack trucks in the city limits. This language tests the limits of what is allowable for local control. But we passed it anyway. Because otherwise we're stuck in this cycle of trickle-down democracy where the state has this power to preempt local control. But here we are in a situation where we don't have that law on the books yet to be preempted. We don't have an abortion ban. We should set ourselves up as a city to not have an abortion ban within our city. And I think it's within our legislative responsibility as citizens to do so. All power is vested in the people. That's a constitutional right, which trumps law and is arguable in court. And I think that we, the people of Athens, have the wherewithal to stand up for what's right and stand up for basic human rights of health care for all of our people. And I hope that you'll consider an ordinance in the future. And I thank you all for working on the resolution that you're working on. It's a step in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, let's move on to our next topic of the Committee of the Whole, land appropriation.
Council members do have a document that describes a 0.577 acre utility easement that the city is working towards a utility, an easement for this piece of property. And Service Safety Director Stone has the details on this.
Sure. Thank you, President Isley. Last week, I spoke to this body in executive session related to land acquisition necessary in order to continue to provide sewage services at University Estates. There's a 0.577 acre parcel that was supposed to have an easement filed back when the University Estates Lift Station 2 was built by University Estates LLC. This happened at the end of 2 different administrations ago, and at the same time the developer was going bankrupt, and through either oversight or failure to do the work correctly, that easement was never recorded. Subsequently, the developer declared bankruptcy. The land in the area was acquired by a bank. The bank subsequently sold the property, and the property changed hands to another landholder. The entire time, there was a lift station that was built there, and the city has been operating it to provide sewage services to what we call University Estates Phase 2. So we only discovered this recently as a developer was coming forward to build more housing in Phase 2, and subsequently we determined when we were reviewing that situation that there was no easement recorded. We've approached the landowner, which is H2 LLC, and offered an amount for that property based on the appraised value, and the landowner declined that offer. And so what we're asking you next week to pass a resolution, and strangely enough, we just had this discussion about resolutions, but in this particular instance of appropriations, it's only a resolution that goes forward that basically resolves that the mayor and the law director take action to appropriate the property through eminent domain actions and through a court of law. So basically that resolution will come forward next week, and then after that there will be a notice served and then a lawsuit filed in order to acquire the easement to continue to provide sewage services in that particular area.
Questions from the committee? Member Swank.
Within the last year, we had another eminent domain situation come before us, and eminent domain is some cases an extreme and drastic measure. So I did a little research last week, and I think I'd like to float the following idea to council. I talked at length with Mr. Hayes about this, and he and I came to the conclusion that he thinks, and I believe the case to be true, that we have one more shot to get this resolved before this goes to court. If this goes to court, it's going to cost the city, and it's going to cost Mr. Hayes and his partner. And what I would like council to consider is the following: because there are some unanswered questions in Mr. Hayes' mind, which I cannot provide answers to schedule one more meeting with Mr. Stone, with our city engineer, with Mr. Hayes and his partner, business partner, and if deemed appropriate, because it falls within Ward 1, Member Spilness also in that meeting, to see if this can't be worked out. Now, I'm not sure it can be, but I think one more conversation might just do it. because this is not a pressing matter, one more week, or with Thanksgiving coming up, 2 more weeks in which to accommodate a meeting might very well be worth it. When we're paying, not us, but we're paying $300 and $400 an hour for an attorney to do something like this, take it to court, the bad will that comes out of that, I would like to do anything possible to avoid that. And I would like council to consider before passing such a resolution to at least entertain the idea of having one more such meeting.
Oh, there you are. Member Spielness. I didn't see your hand.
So, I guess what I'm curious about is, what in that conversation made you believe that he would be amenable to taking that step? And I think that would be important for Director Stone and the mayor or whomever to know before I'm going to vote for that.
Hang on.
And
Member Reisner.
President Pro Tem
Yes.
Reisner, I don't know that that's something that council is going to vote on. I mean, that's a technicality with your wording, but I think we can listen to recommendations from Councilmember Swank, but I'd say that's a call of the law director's office and council administration. And
I
certainly
should've used the word
listen to that
support.
recommendation that you're making, Councilmember Swank. But it's not our decision as to whether to operate on, the council's decision is whether to operate on or to move forward on a resolution.
Yeah, I apologize, I meant
That's
to
okay.
to use the
That's
word
fine.
support
I
rather
just
than
figured
vote
I'd
for.
clarify what our role is or isn't in this case.
So to answer your question directly, Alan, thanks again for reaching out last week. Let me know when is a good time for a meeting. I have a conference room in my office on East State Street. My partner may be in Florida, but can loop her in by phone. The only other person from my side would be my assistant, Kayla Roop, who was a part of the last meeting with Andy Stone, Sully, and Lisa.
Okay.
She's willing to meet. And again,
Member Grace.
I think it's worth our while to make that recommendation.
I just have a question about procedure. Even if council does vote to approve this resolution, giving the city the authority to move forward, couldn't the property owner at any point in time say, like prior to the court action, hey, we're willing to sell you an easement and resolve this?
Member Grace, thank you. Yes.
Okay, that's,
The resolution just gives ultimately allows the mayor to serve notice of intent to acquire, basically that resolution has happened, and then ultimately the law director to file the suit. But, certainly negotiations can continue all the way up, prior to the suit being filed. And to your point, Member Swank, I requested from Mr. Hayes for him to make a counteroffer, and he did not. So, because basically we provided an offer in following the law under eminent domain, offering the appraised value, and he did not make a counteroffer. So that's where we are.
If we pass said resolution, that sends a message. And the message, whether intended or not, is that we feel there is some validity to this and therefore say, go ahead, take the property. I guess what I would like to do is not bring that hammer down until that conversation can be had. And after that conversation is had and we hear from the administration that we tried and it didn't work, then I would be very comfortable passing said resolution. But until that's done, in other words, until you've given your child an opportunity one last time to clean up their room, we don't ground them. And I'm not ready at this point in time to ground anybody.
Member Spielness, you have a comment?
Just for clarity, it's my understanding that this is not a taking of the land. It's a taking of the easement, which is different. And I think that.
Still taking of property, the right to.
Right, but I think it's a fine point that people ought to be aware of.
Yeah, no, we're not gonna take that
Right.
land, like we were gonna do down on West
Right,
Union Street
right.
or
It is-
West
it-
State Street.
It is a different
Yeah,
situation.
but it's exercising control of a piece of property.
Right.
Yeah.
Member Grace?
And just with regard to exercising the control of that piece of property, the city has owned and operated a lift station on that piece of property for several years. And it is something that the residents of University Estates certainly need to have continue operating. So we're only asking for an easement to the property that contains this sewer lift station.
But had this not so-called affordable housing development out there come forward, we'd be sitting here 5 years from now with the same assumption that we have today. That there's and the thing would still be operating. So this happened to come to our attention, and yes, we need to remedy it. But I'm all for trying to work things out before we get heavy with it. So I've said that 5 times now, so that's it.
Duly noted.
Duly noted.
There's nothing more to add to this topic. Transfer of Army to Community Improvement Corporation. Administration.
We passed City Council passed an ordinance authorizing the creation of the Community Improvement Corporation. Those persons have been notified that they're to serve on that, and the first meeting is scheduled for next week for that organizational body. And during our discussion of the creation of this community corporation, we talked about the Armory being one of the properties of interest that would make that we could make use of this mechanism, to be able to do certain improvements to the Armory that might not otherwise be possible if it was still a city piece of property. And what's come before us now is an application through the Appalachian monies. And we have a December 9 deadline, application deadline. And so we are interested in at least beginning the discussion so that we can be working towards having the transfer of the property of the Armory from the city to the Community Improvement Corporation. The law director has provided the deed for the Armory, and it's on our shared drive. You can probably explain more better.
Sure. No, President Isley absolutely described what we're seeking to do, and ultimately, the council can put restrictions upon that transfer to say that the Community Improvements Corporation can't divest of the property. So if that's something that this body would like to do, which I would recommend that this body does, doesn't just say that you can divest of it, but obviously it's something that we don't hold in the public trust, and for all intents and purposes, the Community Improvements Corporation is keeping things in the public trust for the purposes of economic development inside the city. One note, with the Appalachian Communities Grant that we're applying for, the guidelines just came out for that, and the deadline for the implementation round is which is the early $50 million pot of money, is December 9th. And so while we don't need this transferred on December 9th, I'd like to get the ball rolling for the process to move it in there. One of the perfectly unclear portions of the guidelines said that government buildings are not applicable, and then in the next phrase they talked about only governments can apply for things. So go to you see if you can discern that, and as we place questions to the Ohio Department of Development about the particular provisions within the Appalachian Communities Grant guidelines, that's one of the questions we have for them. We believe what they really mean is non-economic development government building efforts for downtown revitalization, such as courthouse renovation or city hall renovation are not applicable. But in this particular project, as this body's aware, we're seeking ultimately to renovate the building and then use it for economic development purposes with the share work, co-work space and the event space and the home of the Athens County Foundation there. So, ultimately, we believe it absolutely fits in line with the intent of the Appalachian Communities Grant. It also fits in line with the goals of the CIC. So that's all. I guess the last thing I would say is we don't need it to pass faster than the grant application is due, but I'd like to get the ball moving and on the transfer to the CIC.
Member Grace.
Just a question. I work for Hopewell Health, and I happen to be aware of an application going in on the same. And so I've read through and they're two different. There's the technical assistance grant that has the deadline December 9th, and then there's the development grant, and then there's another round of the development grant in a year. I think that I read that for if the initial development grant dollars are awarded, the project has to be, what the terminology used was shovel ready, 90 days. So will we be at that point because of everything that's already been done in terms of armory planning? Because Hopewell, I believe, is applying for the technical assistance grant because our infrastructure plans would not be shovel ready 90 days after the award announcement. Because that means 90 days means you've got your plans ready to go and you've got funding figured out pretty much. And then it's like, oh yay, we've got a grant instead. Because otherwise, you can't have something shovel ready in 90 days very easily. But you believe that the projects we would want to do could be put in place shovel ready, so to speak, in the timeline?
Thank you, Member Grace. Yes, absolutely. This body passed money in the budget earlier in the year, and we've been diligently working with the architect, and our goal is to have construction drawings on or about January 1st. So, the requirements of the implementation grant are shovel ready within 90 days of award. Again, in the opaque guidelines from ODOD, awards will be in early 2023. So, early 2023 could be January, it could be March. Bottom line is we're going to have our construction drawings ready to go, as well as the other partner organizations that we're going to apply with, which is going to be the topic of the next committee of the whole item that I have to speak to you about.
My next question was, what are the partner organizations? Okay.
Member Swain.
You mentioned deed restrictions. What happens down the road if the Community Improvement Corporation disappears, dissolves, whatever? Would that property revert back to the city?
Member Swank, yes.
Okay, good, thanks.
Other questions? Members of the audience? Auditor, anything? The grant that you were talking about, does that deal with the next topic, or?
Yes.
The Appalachian.
That was it?
Planning grant.
Okay, because I don't have anything written here about it. So we sort of covered that topic already.
Well, and this is for the phase 1 implementation, and this would be Coshocton, Somerset, Athens, and Logan working together for a co-work space. And the resolution that would be needed from council would authorize the city of Athens to be the lead applicant and fiscal agent. And would include the Athens Armory.
Oh, okay. Any idea how much money we're talking about?
I can speak to it.
Yep.
Up to $50 million.
Yeah, thank you, Member Eisner. So the implementation.
I know the pot's big, but.
Implementation round is $50 million
Yeah.
for, shovel-ready projects, early implementation. We're looking at about a $10 million ask with 4 communities partnering together with like projects that ultimately we're tying together as one project because they're interrelated. And these are 4 communities that are doing renovations of buildings in their downtown. And the renovations are in order to provide space for share work, co-work, that help for economic development in their particular community. And so when you look at the guidelines and what they're scoring, the grants, the applications basically against as a rubric that says downtown revitalization and economic development is very important. And so that scores high, and multiple communities, regional impact is very important, and that scores high. So if you can explain to me what downtown revitalization of multiple communities means, I will fully, I really appreciate that input. But so, we're taking a shot at it, which basically is a project that involves 4 communities with 4 different facilities that are all being renovated, that are all within this time frame of being shovel ready, to apply against this and say, hey, look, we have a group of projects that are interrelated, and so really it's one project. We're asking for about $10 million, and we'd like to be the lead applicant, just so we're the ones press and send. So I know that it goes in on the before November 9th December 9th for ODODs. So I don't know the form of this legislation yet, because again, the guidelines don't specifically say you have to have legislation from a governmental body in order to have multiple people function together. I do know that there will be a subrecipient agreement with each of the other communities for the money to flow through us to those communities. And so, I'm assuming that there will need to be some sort of legislation that says the city of Athens can serve as the lead applicant. And will work furiously between now and next Monday to see what that form needs to look like.
Member Swank.
Those other 3 communities, are they all good with us being the lead applicant?
Member Swank, yes. We've discussed it multiple times.
I don't know if you've been to Coshocton lately or not, but Coshocton in the last 40 years has been devastated by an exodus of industry. Pretty products, AK Steel, Conesville Power Plant going down. And I often watch free reduced lunch figures in school districts, and theirs has just skyrocketed. So they're now trying to turn that around. And the way you describe this, the weighting of this for the award, I hate to get the cart before the horse, but this almost sounds like a slam dunk, partnering with these 3 other communities to do what we're trying to do. So the sooner we can get this done, the better.
I couldn't agree more.
Member Spielmus.
So I'm curious about if you could clarify a little bit what the interrelationship is with the 4. I mean, how would that work? How would we help each other?
Thank you, Member Spielmus. The structure that we're envisioning is a shared membership for participants who have access to one of the locations to be able to also go and use the other locations if they are to buy a membership for a certain number of hours per month of use of open space. They could use any of the spaces. Another technique or another portion of this would be if you use one space, you could go to one of the other spaces and you could rent that space at a discount. And so really those are the 2 arrangements that we're looking at. In our case, we have a nonprofit identified that ultimately is going to run the space and lease from the CIC the space in order to operate the facility, and they would have to basically have that agreement with the entities that run the other 3 facilities. And in each case, there's a different entity running the other facilities, but all of us are committed to making this application and working together. And it's not just to get the grant money. It really kind of makes sense. All of these facilities are within 70 miles of Intel. So we really do believe, with both Intel and then all the second and third order economic development and businesses that are going to come to the region because of that, that this is really a fertile ground for this type of work in this area. And so it makes all the sense in the world for the grant, and then also just for operations.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the committee? Audience? I believe that takes care of everything at the committee of the whole then. You can wake up now. So. Finance and Personnel Committee is next, And Chair is Sam Crowell. Member is myself, and Sylvie Spielness, and members Ben Ziff.
Thank you, President Pro Tem Reisner. First item on our committee meeting this evening is the 2023 budget. The city administration has provided us with their draft of the budget as well as the 2022 budget for comparison purposes. I'm sure you've seen on your drive from the general fund and on through all the other funds within the city. Would the city administration like to speak to this off the bat?
You can go ahead.
Thank you, Member Crow. If you break the budget document 015022 into a couple different parts, you've got the general fund and you've got the bottom line against the general fund of $15,951,000. That's about a 4.8% increase over 2022. Not a huge increase, but it's a notable increase. We're still dialing in several of these different things. I really think our personnel lines are the things that are driving that. Just the function of additional costs associated with people. The other funds, so basically starting at Fund 206 all the way through Fund 903 at the very end. That's about a 10% increase over last year. That's a total of $33,100,000. Almost all of that increase resides in the appropriation of ODOT funds for upcoming projects. And so if you look at Fund 589, there's a significant increase there compared to 2022. There are a few other places where there are increases. There's a few places where there are decreases. If you look at the budget totals, but by and large, that's really the big driver that's driving that significant increase. One place that I'm particularly concerned in those other funds, because a lot of those funds are constrained by what they do and then what their revenue sources are. And then when you get down into the proprietary funds, the monies that come in from there can only be spent on that particular type of activity. But the ones that I have some concern about, and we're really kind of dialing in a little bit more, is 270 and 271, the rec and the community center operations fund. And specifically the TC 100s. And here we're throwing around millions as we talk about the bottom line numbers, but when we talk about how those operate, 270 and 271, those are really on a shoestring every year with both the taxes that we use to subsidize that operation, and then the revenue that comes in from the various charges that happen. And personnel costs, one personnel cost that I'm particularly concerned with is a couple of years ago, council passed legislation that called for increases to part-time and seasonal employees to push those wages up to $15 an hour over I think a 5-year period or a 4-year period. We're up to I think the second year in that, or the third year through that, second year through that, and the base wage now is $12 for all of those seasonal and part-time places. That really impacts the rec and the community center operation way more than anywhere else in the city, because they have the vast majority of those particular positions. And with our projections, even with a number of efficiencies that we believe we can achieve with pool operation for next year, those increases are driving about a $75,000 increase in TC 100 costs. And so when we're bumping up against all the revenue that's in the fund and that's coming into the fund in TU70 and 271, that's a place where I have some concerns, and that actually is the topic of the next agenda item when we get into that. But barring that, those are the primary points on the budget. if there are specific questions about specific lines, I can take some notes. Some of them I might be able to speak right off the top of my head. Some of them I might have to go back. And this document, this 15022 document, might adjust a little bit during the week as we dial in a couple other things. But by and large, this is the majority of what's going to be in here.
Thank you, Director Stone. We will get into sort of the administration's proposed fix for the problem that was identified by Director Stone on the next item of our committee meeting tonight. So that's coming, but are there any questions from the committee regarding this quarterly budget? Yes, Member Spionis.
Okay, so in my experience working on various management situations and boards and whatnot, I've always seen a percentage showing between the previous year and the upcoming year, so you can, because that really helps you to appreciate what exactly is happening. And since that wasn't there, my husband and I went back and figured out the percentage for all of them, comparing them. And I would really like to see, and I'm surprised it's not here, percentages reported on an ongoing basis. I think it's very hard to assess how you're doing without showing the percentage increase over the previous year. The percent of total, to me, is not as valuable as the percentage over what was spent the year before. So doing that, one area that I thought was interesting that went down considerably, and I'm wondering why, is the court costs. I see that fire and police are up fairly significantly, but that's understandable. We get that. And then IT went up quite a bit, and I'm kind of curious about that. I know we outsourced, but what did that mean? So I'm particularly interested in why the court costs went down fairly substantially in terms of personnel, particularly.
Would the city administration like to answer that? Should I, let's see if.
I can speak to IT. You know, the number of IT costs that we expect to have with hardware and software upgrades in the coming year is pretty significant. So really, it's not people that are driving this. It's professional services and hardware and coding. And so we've got a number of initiatives in order to maintain the secure environment. There's a host of things. If you want to sit down and go over some of the specifics, I can arrange a meeting to talk about that. But for instance, copper line as a phone system is gradually being sunset across the United States. As people move to all voice over IP systems, and so cost associated with moving hardware and the systems over to that is one of the costs. Switch to Office 365, so we stopped buying Microsoft Office, various Microsoft Office licenses, are things that are changed, plus a variety of other changes. I can get into the specifics there if you want to sit down and we can.
Well, I was just curious the
Sure.
extent to which the outsourcing that I believe happened this year, is that driving?
I mean, it's working. It's making we're tackling problems that we haven't tackled for a long time to get us up ahead. For instance, of late we installed the new firewalls that we've had sitting on the shelf for about 3 years and really needed to install. And it was very painful to do it. But with the help of the external firm that we used to help manage the system, we were able to get that done. So I think right now Lucas is pretty happy with the arrangement that we have with the Go-To IT, the firm that we use. But certainly we can get into the specifics about all the expenses for next year.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the reduction in the court costs. I'm hoping that that's a good thing.
Yeah, I know that there are a couple employees down right now. I don't have the specifics in the TC 100 cost for that, but they've had a significant drop in caseload. Tanya Dye comes to our city mayor's staff meeting every other week, and she briefs that. So, you know, given that their caseload drops, their revenue drops because there's less court costs and fines. And, you know, you can look at it from one perspective and say, hey, we're happy that less people are breaking the law. But when your budget is based upon people breaking the law and paying court costs and fines, you know, you have to make adjustments accordingly. And so I think because they're down a couple people, that's why that TC 100 cost is down.
Are there any additional questions on the IT point that Ms. Bell has brought up? Would anybody not on the committee like to address the court?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the auditor probably has more details, but I know there have been some staffing changes and a reduction in the number of staff because they determined that they could manage the court operations with fewer staff members. So and some staff members had been with the city for a long time. So changes in the number of staff reduces the cost.
Okay.
Would the auditor like to join us, make any comments?
So I agree with Member Grace that they have had some reductions in their personnel costs. So I guess I'm trying to follow how we're looking at this budget because I look at it from several different ways. So you're looking at the estimated budget for next year and you're comparing it with what the budget was or what was spent last year.
Well,
Is that-
the change in costs, whatever the projected.
From last year.
Yeah,
So
from last year to this year.
the budget,
From this past year to the going forward.
the total cost you mean for court? Is that what you're looking at?
In that case, I think it was personnel.
Okay. That's all I know about is their reduction in personnel, which we all know is the largest part of any budget really in the city, most of them. So at least 2 full-time people have been gone, left
Great to
several
know
months.
that crime is going down.
Well, yeah. I don't know about that. It's just hard to compare budgets from the last 2 years to this year because of COVID. What went on, what didn't go on, you know, and court kept operating, so there weren't as many fluctuations as some of our other funds and account lines. But yeah, I'd have to look at it more closely to see what you're comparing exactly. I'm going through. I shouldn't say I've been doing this tonight. Going through revenue and expense reports for the ending in October to see where we have brought more money in and where we have spent more or less than we projected. So there's a big difference between this budget that we put together and what actually is spent throughout the year. And that's why council is often adding appropriations on because we end up needing more money to be able to spend more money for various things. And so we've actually done pretty well revenue-wise in a lot of areas that have been down for 2 years, really. Parking meters, the pool, just a lot of areas I was surprised about. Things like taps, you know, water taps, things like that. The construction, you know, in the area changed, and there's just a lot of things to look at in that respect. And so yeah, revenue-wise is very different, and the same with expense-wise, because there were things we didn't do, you know, and I don't know. I don't know anything else about court except that if you're talking about personnel in the 100s, then that's what it is. They've reduced their staff by 2 full-time people.
Mayor Pro Tem, would you like to speak?
I think Auditor Heck answered the question. I was just wondering, Councilmember Spielness, I wasn't sure if you were comparing last year's budget that was shown in the shared documents with this year's, and as Safety
Well, the
Director's...
projected budget for 2023, which we're talking about.
Right, and were you comparing it to the previous one that's on the shared drive? And what Service Safety Director Stone was pointing out is that in certain cases, we started out the year with a certain budget, but we've made appropriation amendments during the year. And so that's why some of them may be significantly higher or lower. Some of them could be lower.
I'd be happy to get with you and send you anything. I don't always send a lot of things to council. It depends on how far in the weeds you want to go. But we also do a comparison report, which, that's why I said it depends on what you're looking at. Are you looking at the actual budget from last year, or the budget ordinance and spreadsheet that was prepared a year ago now? Because as Member Nisley just said, it varies a lot. We've added millions of dollars to our budget over the years through appropriations. And so it's kind of hard to use this document. A more accurate document, I think, would be a system report, which are the actual numbers that we
Yeah, that
we
would
do.
be more
And
helpful.
so although we have government accounting where we have an expense report and we have a revenue report, we do pull together, we do a comparison report, and that can show you in those two areas. And then that's why we do the unappropriated balance sheet, because it shows you the money we expected to come in and what was appropriated and what we have left. And so we have a lot of different documents that I can show you that would give you a better representation of what's gone up and what's gone down.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's really helpful to see what we did spend in 2022 and what we're projected then, what we want to spend in the budget that we're planning for 2023, and the percentage difference. That's
Sure.
what I'm,
So I have kept for, I don't know, 18 years now, like year-end reports, the final one for the year, and it shows you what we budgeted or we put in our account lines and what we actually spent or brought in compared to what council passed for the budget. So keep in mind, they're working on an expense budget based on what they think their needs are.
Sure.
And right now, it has nothing to do with what I think is going to come in revenue-wise. And so that's what I'm looking at now at the same time. However, that's not something that goes through council. That's done in the auditor's office.
sure.
And so, that's where we might, have issues is if I think we're only going to bring in this much revenue this year because this is all we brought, or next year because this is all we brought in this year. But, as Service Safety Director Stone was saying, we struggle with a very tight budget in Parks and Recreation funds. So, and some other funds are pretty tight just because. And so, if you let me know if there's another way, I'm looking at this very differently than what you are looking at with what you have to work with. And an unappropriated balance sheet would show you how much additional appropriations have been done in a fund. I'd be happy to send you one of those. That's a spreadsheet that we do in-house because our finance system doesn't work that way. Doesn't work like a checkbook, and we combine it ourselves. But millions of additional appropriations are passed by council every year.
Thank you, Auditor. Yes.
Along the same lines to what the auditor just mentioned, Member Crow, my guidance to my department heads is any single expenditure that you expect to be greater than $50,000 do not include in this budget. And the reason is that City Council has to pass legislation authorizing that expenditure anyway. And so we don't do those appropriations at the beginning of the year if they haven't, unless it's part of a project that's already been authorized that carries forward, like for instance that ODOT money I was talking about in Fund 589. But say for instance there's a significant piece of equipment that costs more than $50,000, the council is going to have to authorize it, and so I just tell the department heads don't put that in there because we will we'll go to council for that single project and seek a separate appropriation, when we seek for the authorization.
Thank you. It's all very good information. Yes, Member Swank?
Two quick questions. Do we have at this point in time a preliminary estimate of what our revenue will be for fiscal year 2023? And then the second part, how much federal money do we still have?
Auditor, you want to take the first question?
Yeah. So that's what I'm working on now, as I said. I'm working on the revenue now. It's hard to do a good projection until closer till the end of the year on the revenue side. And so, you know, we just do that in my office and we will pull that together in the end. If there are, and this has happened, if the budget that council is looking at, which we'll be looking at this as this goes through in the next couple of weeks, is higher than what I think the revenue is going to be. In January, February, I will be asking council to reduce budgets to account for what I think the revenue is going to be. On the other hand, there are areas where I might increase the revenue to cover their budget if I think there is a possibility that that money will come in. I do have one other thing I was going to say. I did happen to bring an unappropriated balance sheet for the end of September, not October, just for the record, but year-to-date additional appropriations, which would have all gone through council, $7,123,971 has been added to the budget that council passed at the end of last year.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee on the 2023 budget? Other members of council, audience, city administration?
Federal money question.
Federal?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you had the federal money question?
Yes, sir.
There's a couple different places where federal money is that I think you're talking about. So there was the CARES Act,
Right.
and then there was ARPA, and then there's the other federal money that whenever we get a grant, we apply.
The COVID-related.
COVID-related, okay,
Yes.
so I can't speak entirely to CARES Act, because all of that has been moved into the general fund, and it's functioning basically as a cushion in the general fund right now for us, but I can speak to ARPA. We anticipate receiving another $1.2 million in ARPA money here coming up in the next year.
And that would be the last
The last
allocation?
tranche, correct.
1.2?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, the income tax mix. And the city of Athens has a number of tax levies that equal almost 13% of our revenues, and those monies go directly into those funds. Left over from that is the rest is 87.11%. That then is by ordinance mixed amongst various funds in the city. 73% of that goes into the general fund. 18% of that goes into streets. 5% goes into the recreation department. 3% goes into capital, and 1% goes into transit. That is what we call the income tax mix. As Director Stone was just discussing, the city administration is proposing a change in the income tax mix to hopefully fill some of this hole. Would you like to address that directly, Director Stone?
Go ahead. Yeah. I can, thank you, Member Krause. So, each percent of the what's left over after the special levies, are paid, is about $130,000. $130,000 to $140,000, and so
that's 1%.
That's 1% of the, not 1% income tax, but 1% of the remainder of what's leaving. When we talk about the mix of everything after those primary or those special levies come through. Right now, as Member Crowell mentioned, there's those different percentages go to the different places, and we believe that the rec fund is really going to be close. And we'd like to increase that. At our meeting on Tuesday, I proposed increasing it by 0.5% by decreasing the street fund from 18% to 17.5%. So street fund to 17.5, rec fund to 5.5. That said, after we had that conversation on Tuesday, the mayor and I spoke quite a bit more based upon the analysis that the Arts, Parks, and Rec Director did. And ultimately, I think a full percent really might be necessary in the rec fund. And so we'd like to reduce that general fund transfer of 72.5% and the street fund to 17.5% to increase the rec fund to 6%. My hope is that that'll help stabilize things there in that particular fund. It's not all the money, but there's a lot of demands on that department. And every time I turn around, there's more demands on that department of things that the citizens want. And so given the cost associated with those part-time pay increases that have been legislated, as well as the cost associated with the various demands, we think this is an appropriate change to the mix.
So if I understand correctly, this would be about $130,000
Yes.
that would be going to the Recreation Department.
Correct, Member Crowell. And if you remember, ultimately we ended up subsidizing 270 and 271 some with the 273 special rec fund anyway. I'd like to not to have to do that in this coming year. We'll try not to do that in this coming year. And this hopefully will help with that.
Okay, so this is the income tax mix. Does the committee have any comments on the income tax mix? Other members of council? Member Swank?
Have we done a thorough analysis of what I'm going to call a mass exodus of memberships from the rec center, and what effect closing at 4 o'clock on Saturday and not opening on Sunday has had on that from a revenue standpoint?
Sure. Thank you, Member Swank. I appreciate you bringing that specific item up because we do plan on opening on Sunday next year, so at least for limited hours. We had the discussion here recently because we know there's a demand for that. I would argue that the opening of Planet Fitness, number one, and the pandemic, number two, were really the two things to drive membership down over the last several years. However, potentially closing at 4 p.m. on Saturday and not being open on Sunday also has driven membership down. It's very difficult to ask a person who no longer comes, why do you no longer come? But that would be my assessment as the main drivers.
Well, I've asked that question of people. Planet Fitness is one. It's open extended hours. Secondly, you can take your Planet Fitness membership anywhere. Second is availability of working machines. And that Sunday thing is a big deal for some people. Some people like to go work out, go home, shower, and then go to church. So it has had an effect, and I've surveyed people, not a tremendous number, but I have surveyed people on that. I guess the other question I would ask, I don't know if the document has been signed yet or not, but it sounds like revenue down at the rec center is an issue. We're in the process of moving the farmers market down there. Are we really charging enough? They're paying $30,000 out at the mall. We're giving them half that same service for half price. And is that a prudent figure, or maybe should we be charging more?
Thank you, Member Swank. Memberships is not a significant portion, or it is a significant portion, but it's not that much of the revenue in the 270 and 271 fund. Really taxes are ultimately what are the lion's share. We try to do cost recovery in the services that we offer as much as possible. I think the industry standard is to try to recover 40% of your costs. Regarding loss of revenue associated with hours versus cost and demands on the system there, it's tough to say. What specifically changes and levers we can pull to increase membership. Certainly fixing machines and being open more hours are two things we could do to potentially bring in more membership. I don't know that will equate to the cost associated with fixing the machines and being open for more hours. And that just may be a service we want to issue to, give to the citizens via tax subsidies. With regard to your question on the community center, $15,000 is the cost, this is what we think it will cost. However, in the facilities use agreement, we identified that we would review that within a year, and if it, for whatever reason, costs more than that, then we would adjust that in future years. So, to say whether or not that's market rate or not, I don't know that I could say that. Clearly, market rate is $30,000, or else Mr. Hayes wouldn't be charging them $30,000 at the thing. So we could do market rate, but the ordinance on the book says that we shall provide a space, and we thought it appropriate to charge what we thought our costs were going to be for the space versus market rate. But we will review it as the year goes on. If it costs more than that, then we can adjust that facilities use agreement.
Thank you, Director Stone. Any other comments from other committee members? Auditor?
I was just going to do a quick update here. As I said, we've got our October reports done for the month of October. And as far as our projections for revenue for last year, both rec and the community center have they're at 97 and 95% after 10 months. So I'll be adjusting those revenue estimates higher because we have brought in more money than we expected already this year. Whether we're back at 2019 or comparison to 2019, I'd have to look at that. But we've done really well this year. We projected and we do a pretty good job of that, but there was no way of knowing after COVID how it would come back, and they both, they're almost at 100% of what we projected after 10 months.
Thank you, Auditor. Any other questions? Members of the audience? Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next item. Elected officials' salaries.
Bring past the hat.
Thank you to the city administration, the clerk, as well as the mayor's office for providing us with some previous ordinances for elected official salary, as well as comparison of other communities in the state of Ohio. I am just going to open this up for discussion. Would anyone on the committee like to dig into elected officials' salaries? Other members of council?
What action does this require of council, if any?
It will require an ordinance if we are going to make changes. And it's going to require an ordinance either way. Right now, the current, we're under the ordinance that goes through 2024, right?
Correct.
Right.
So the ordinance now would commence for 25, and if you don't act on it, then there will be no increase.
And the timeline for this?
It needs to be passed before the filing deadline by the Board of Elections for people, elected officials who are seeking re-election.
That's February 1st, 2nd, 3rd, that
6th,
neighborhood.
I think.
It's early this year.
Is it?
Yep. It would be, I think the thinking in bringing it up now is that it would be cleaner to have it passed before the end of the year. But wouldn't have to.
And does it have to be a comprehensive ordinance? And by that I mean, does it have to affect all elected officials? Can it affect some elected officials? Customarily, how is it done? Is it the whole gamut,
It's the whole
A to
gamut.
Z?
I think it's the whole gamut.
Member Grace?
In theory, we could pass an ordinance that has different rates of increase based on different positions.
Like we did with the other stuff.
Yeah, so that, the mayor, as an elected official, the mayor's salary increases by a set percentage, and president of council could be a different percentage. And that percentage could be zero for any, which is what it would be if we don't do anything. So that in 2025, there would be no raise. It's a little odd to try to think what the raise for someone in your position should be 2 years from now. And I said at work today that this was on the agenda, and it is an awkward conversation to have as elected officials, and sort of having this conversation in the public eye to discuss what we think our and other elected officials' jobs are worth, what they should be paid. So,
Correct me if, city council is elected every 2 years. Everybody else is every 4. So then city council's raises or not come at different times than other elected officials? In other words, we're going to be up for re-election in 2023. So if we pass an ordinance that says, well, city council gets XYZ raise, it would take effect when the new council was seated in 2024, correct?
except we already have it in
We have
place
that.
for 2024. It would be the second year of that new council's term, so in 2025.
If council passes an ordinance with a different amount for that year, that overrides what was
That's
already
what I
done.
thought, that's what.
I don't know how this happened that we have 5 years on this one, but in
Yeah.
all my previous years on council and in this office, they did it 4 years at a time for my office, 2 years for council, and the treasurer's position is on a 4-year term, but it's not the same 4 years as mine and the mayor and the law directors. And there used to be a separate ordinance for the treasurer's salary, then it got forgotten one time and she went 4 years without any raise. So,
That's probably how we got off track.
yeah, so they put her salary into the one ordinance. And that doesn't mean if you put a council salaries in there for 4 years, in 2 years you can come back and change it, because that also has been done before.
We can do whatever we want, really.
As long as you do it within, before that election.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
can't-
that's, I mean,
Yeah.
you don't want to talk about that because it's a political hot potato, okay? But that is the truth of the matter. We're council, we budget, we can set it up the way we choose to do it. And we can say, okay, every 2 years you're going to get a raise, or we can say every 4 years. And like you say, we can come back and change it if we change our mind, if you get a new council in here. So that's something everyone has to think about.
So right now, the way that the law reads, and I'll just take council, in 2023, we will each receive $8,918.78. Should each of us choose to run again and get reelected, the following year we'll get $9,097.14 if we do nothing.
Correct.
So tonight, we could do nothing. Tonight, we could say, you know what, that 8,900 and 9,000 isn't enough, and we could come up with some other numbers. Or we could say, starting in 2025, it's going to be X amount. And we could do 2025 and 26 and 27, however many years we wanted.
Right. And you could do that with every other elected official.
And of all,
Member Grace?
well, I was just gonna figure, of the three,
We-
that was the one that I would, that's what I would prefer.
Member Grace?
We just add on at the end.
It's my understanding that we could not change our own salaries for the term we're already
True.
serving.
That's
So
correct.
That's true.
So in terms of we can do whatever we want, we cannot say, you know what, starting January 2023, city councils each get $100,000
Right.
or $12,000. We cannot change a salary that we are guaranteed to have, having already won the election. So
I
that's
think you
why.
understood what I
Yeah,
was getting at.
but we cannot change the salary for 2023,
We
but
could
we
for
could
24.
for starting 2024 and thereafter, because none of us are guaranteed to be in this position in 2024.
Right.
So, but I just wanted, if anyone out there is watching, we cannot change the salary that, for the term we are already elected to. So,
Thank you, Member Grace. Other comments? elected officials?
This is a cursory look on my part. I did not go through an analysis of every amount, but I think the Ohio Municipal League indicates we're about middle of the road.
We are.
I mean, there are some council members who are only getting $100 per meeting. And so, we're faring obviously far better than that. The other thing I think is that council members and elected officials have have closely followed in the percentages that non-union employees have made. And granted, there's a progressive kind of alignment, but it's usually been in the 2% range. So those are my comments. I mean, we're all dedicated to public service, and we do a lot of hours and a lot of different meetings. So, yeah.
Didn't a lot of the cities that the Ohio Municipal League lists there that we were supposed to be equivalent to our charter? There's very few judicial cities out there.
Statutory, correct.
Statutory,
Correct.
yes.
Most
That's
on the
true.
list were charter.
Charter, yeah.
Member Swank?
So what the last ordinance was a 2% increase per year for all those 5 to the acting mayor's point. For those cities in Ohio between 20,000 and 30,000, regardless of how the city's set up, the average salary was $9,055.34 for a council member. So we're right there. We're within $100 or $2. So I guess what I'm saying, if we have to get this to an ordinance standpoint, this 2%, which someone just mentioned, the Ohio Municipal League, what we've done in the last thing seems to me to be a reasonable increase. And then it's just, if we did that, just a matter of how many years past 2024 would we want it to be?
And are you recommending that same increase for the other positions?
Assuming that those other positions had that, yes. But I did not do the math on those other positions. I was just attacking the council part of it.
Other questions? Comments? Yes, please. Thank you.
Mary Abel, 48 Strathmore. Just for the sake of transparency, and you're discussing the salaries, would you just go through what those elected officials and their current salaries are so that anyone watching knows that? It's a little nebulous and may not be clear, and I think that would be very helpful if you would do that. Thank you.
Sure, Mrs. Abel, no problem. The ordinance that we are looking at right now, which was effective January 1st, 2019, for the mayor for calendar year 2022, $89,746.80. For the auditor for calendar year 2022, $77,979.72. Members of council, as mentioned, for calendar year 2022, $8,743.80. The president of council for calendar year 2022, $10,887.10. The director of law for calendar year 2022, $77,979.72. And finally, the treasurer for calendar year 2022, $16,166.02.
And one thing you need to point out for the
Hold
law
on,
director.
just real quick, Member Swank. Not all of these are full-time positions,
Yeah.
so just be aware that these are not 40-hour per week positions. Member Swank, do you have something else to
That's
say?
what I was gonna say, the law director's a 30-hour position.
Thank
I
you.
just did the math on all those, all the other raises were 2% also.
Correct. Other questions or comments from the audience, the administration, council? Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next item on our agenda. Allocation of funds. This is to amend 17.01.013 to add our new public safety levy on January 1st of next year. Would you like to speak to this? This is sort of, or the auditor, this is just business as usual.
Excuse me, yeah, we asked for this, and this is to go in our tax code language, where there is a list of the percentages we, that are passed by levy, and how long they last. And so we've added this other additional percent onto that, and that needs to be in our tax code. That's where that's from.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee on this? Other members of council? City administration, public?
Did I hear that right? It's
Please,
a one-
Member Reisner.
The levy is a 1%?
0.1%, sorry.
Okay.
Or 1%, it depends on how you write it out.
Okay, moving on to the last item on our agenda, appropriations, $11,000 to the transient guest tax. Auditor, would you like to speak to this as well?
Two.
Sorry. What is it? Oh, additional.
This is the TGT, yeah.
Yeah. So that's an example where we brought in more money this year than we thought we would. And so when we receive that money, it's kind of pass-through money. Half goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau and half goes into our general fund. And, but it goes in through the other fund first. So we just need an additional amount of money to pay the Convention and Visitors Bureau for our transient guest tax. And, yeah, and just to add on to that, we have about 8 new B&Bs we've added to our list to collect these guest tax from this year, which, you know, are smaller amounts compared to the hotels, but still.
Thank you, Auditor. Members of the committee, any questions about this TGT appropriation? Other members of council? Members of the audience? Elected city administration? Okay, President Pro Tem Reisner, that ends finance and personnel.
Thank you, Member Crowell. I see nothing left on our agenda, so we're adjourned.